A billionaire walked into a restaurant thinking it was just another night, until a little girl's note shattered his world. By the end of this story, he won't just be fighting for his fortune, he'll be fighting for family. Watch closely because what happens in that courtroom will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The night air around the city shimmered with neon reflections, the hum of traffic below a constant lull beneath the high glass windows of the exclusive Aurelia restaurant. Inside, the atmosphere was curated perfection. Crystal chandeliers refracting soft amber light over marble tables, hushed voices speaking in measured tones about profits and markets, and the low clinking of cutlery echoing the unbroken rhythms of wealth. At the center of one table sat Adrian Cole, the 42-year-old titan of coal industries, whose face was as familiar in financial magazines as it was feared in corporate boardrooms. Every gesture he made, every calculated nod to the investors surrounding him, was choreographed control. His empire, built brick by brick through ruthless ambition, had conditioned him to remain composed even as fortunes rose and collapsed around him. Yet that composure faltered when the waiter, silent and precise, replaced his empty appetizer plate and left something folded beneath it. A napkin, plain white, yet trembling faintly in Adrian's hands as he drew it toward him. The handwriting upon it was not elegant, not the careful script of adults. Rather, it was childish, uneven letters pressed deeply into the fibers of the fabric, as though written with urgent conviction. My name is Lily. My mother said you are my father. She is gone. Grandma is gone too. I am at St. Clair's shelter. Please come before I disappear too. The words seemed to echo louder than the murmured voices of investment bankers, louder than the music drifting softly through the restaurant's speakers. For the first time in years, Adrian's mind ceased calculating. The name Lily reverberated in him, but another name struck deeper. Clara. The past surged forward with brutal clarity. The young painter whose art had been as wild and unrestrained as his life was disciplined. The woman whose laughter had been sunlight against the gray machinery of his world. A decade ago, when his company demanded everything, Adrian had chosen steel and glass over love, progress over warmth, ambition over Clara. He had buried the memory deep, convincing himself she had belonged to another lifetime. But now, in this single message scrawled by a child's hand, the consequences of that choice returned, demanding acknowledgement. The dinner faded into meaningless static. The projections and figures that moments ago had consumed him were now hollow abstractions, meaningless when compared to 8 words written by someone he had never met yet, whose existence unraveled him completely. He stood abruptly, the sharp scrape of his chair against polished hardwood drawing startled glances. Murmured protests from the bankers reached him dimly, but he offered no explanations beyond the terse phrase that felt strange in his mouth. Family emergency. He had never spoken those words before. He hardly knew what they meant. Outside, the cold night embraced him as he descended the steps of Aurelia and entered the waiting black sedan. The city's skyline stretched around him in glass towers and silver light, monuments to victories that now seemed hollow. He ordered the driver to St. Clair's shelter, a part of the city Adrian had never set foot in, a district forgotten by investors and untouched by luxury. The further they drove, the more the gleaming architecture gave way to crumbling brick, the spotless sidewalks to cracked concrete and flickering street lamps. It felt almost like traveling backward through time, away from what he had built and towards something raw and unfinished. St. Clair's shelter stood at the end of a narrow street, its facade weathered by years of rain and neglect. Yellow light spilled from its windows, warm yet weary, hinting at the fragile hope housed within. Adrian stepped out of the car, his breath misting in the night air, and hesitated for the first time in years. For all his billions, he felt powerless before the chipped wooden doors of the shelter. Inside, the smell of disinfectant mingled with the faint aroma of soup. Volunteers moved quietly among children curled on worn couches, their belongings packed into plastic bags at their feet. The weight of their collective stories pressed heavily against Adrian's chest as a woman with tired eyes and a gentle voice approached him. Without judgment or ceremony, she led him down a dim hallway lined with peeling posters and faded murals of rainbows. She explained in hushed tones that Lily's mother, Clara Hayes, had succumbed to illness months earlier. The grandmother, Margaret, who had cared for Lily since Clara's passing, had died only days ago. Lily had been brought here with no known relatives willing to claim her. Adrian's presence was both a shock and, perhaps, the child's last chance at stability. The woman's words blurred in his ears as dread and disbelief twisted within him. A daughter. The phrase felt impossible, absurd, and yet undeniable. At the end of the hallway in a small office with flickering fluorescent lights, she appeared. Lily Hayes, 8 years old, fragile yet unbroken. Her hair was a cascade of light gold, unbrushed and falling across her cheeks, but her eyes, startlingly blue, clear and piercing, halted him mid-breath. In those eyes, Adrian saw himself, the same rare shade, the same unyielding clarity that had once unsettled Clara when she teased him about his steel gaze. The resemblance was undeniable. She stood clutching a frayed teddy bear, its fabric threadbare, and wore a faded sweater 2 sizes too large. No words were spoken. They didn't need to be. Recognition happened in silence. The social worker's voice receded into the background as Adrian knelt slightly, lowering himself to her level. Lily extended her wrist without prompting, revealing a crescent-shaped birthmark faintly visible against her pale skin. A mark he bore as well, a quirk of genetics passed unknowingly from father to daughter. The quiet confirmation stole the air from his lungs. There was no more room for denial. In that instant, the empire builder who had measured his worth in profits and acquisitions was undone by a child's silent testimony. He left the shelter that night not as the unflappable CEO who had walked in, but as something unfamiliar, something raw and unsteady. Lily sat beside him in the back seat of the car, silent, clutching her teddy bear as the city lights streaked past. Every towering building he had constructed, every corporate triumph he had celebrated, now felt irrelevant beside the fragile presence of the girl at his side. His penthouse loomed ahead, a monument to ambition, immaculate and impersonal, utterly unprepared for the arrival of a child who carried both the memory of Clara and the weight of his unacknowledged past. As they entered the building, marble floors and glass elevators reflected Lily's small figure, dwarfed by opulence. She stepped cautiously into the penthouse, her gaze sweeping across pristine surfaces devoid of photographs or personal warmth. For Adrian, the silence was deafening. He led her to a spare bedroom, neutral colors, oversized bed, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a breathtaking cityscape. It was elegant but cold, a room designed for guests, not for childhood. Lily placed her small suitcase on the floor. Its contents, a few clothes, a worn drawing, the teddy bear looked painfully inadequate against the vastness of the space. That first night, Adrian discovered the weight of responsibility he had never prepared for. He stood at the threshold of her room long after she fell asleep, watching her small figure curl beneath the covers. Every instinct in him screamed that he was unworthy, that he had forfeited the right to this role years ago when he walked away from Clara. Yet another instinct, one unfamiliar yet undeniable, urged him to try to be the anchor this child had never had. When dawn broke, light spilling across the penthouse windows, Adrian Cole was no longer simply the billionaire who had built towers of glass and steel. He was something far more uncertain, yet far more consequential. A father in the making, standing at the threshold of redemption he never sought but could no longer ignore. The first morning in the penthouse began not with the measured routine Adrian Cole had perfected over decades, but with quiet hesitation and unfamiliar sounds. The soft padding of small feet on polished marble floors. The distant rustle of a child exploring rooms designed for executives rather than families. The space, once celebrated in architectural magazines for its sleek minimalism, now felt sterile under the weight of its new inhabitant. For the first time, Adrian noticed the absence of color, the lack of warmth in walls lined only with abstract art and awards. Achievements that meant little to the 8-year-old now curled on a bar stool in his kitchen. Adrian moved through the space like a man out of place in his own home. His refrigerator, stocked with gourmet items curated for solitary evenings, offered nothing recognizable to a child. Imported wines, Rare cheeses and perfectly portioned meals from elite caterers seemed almost mocking in their irrelevance to the needs of someone whose idea of comfort was likely simpler and far less curated. He found himself staring at the shelves in quiet panic, realizing he did not even know what Lily might like to eat, let alone what would comfort her. The child remained quiet, her movements careful, deliberate, as though testing invisible boundaries in an unfamiliar world. She clutched the frayed teddy bear constantly, its presence a tether to the life she had known before all this. Adrian recognized the look in her eyes, not fear exactly, but wariness, the guarded expression of someone accustomed to disappointment. It mirrored an expression he had worn himself in boardrooms, albeit for different reasons. For Lily, this wasn't about strategy or profit. It was about survival, about cautiously measuring whether she was safe in this new reality. By midday, Adrian's carefully constructed schedule, once dictated by quarterly reports and investor calls, lay abandoned. He drove Lily to a department store, a place he had rarely visited personally in years, preferring the convenience of personal shoppers and curated deliveries. The bright chaos of children's aisles overwhelmed him, shelves bursting with colors and characters he did not recognize, clothes tiny enough to fold into his palm, toys that promised worlds of imagination foreign to his meticulously ordered existence. He instructed her to choose whatever she liked, a phrase that seemed foreign to both of them. Lily moved hesitantly, her eyes scanning racks without touching, instinctively cautious about cost as though bracing for reprimand. That simple hesitation, learned young, struck Adrian more deeply than any boardroom confrontation ever had. Gradually, he coaxed her into selecting necessities, soft sweaters, sturdy shoes, a winter coat. But it was in the art supplies aisle that something shifted. Her small hands lingered on a set of paints, brushes, and a wooden easel, eyes alight with a spark Adrian recognized instantly. Clara's spark. The memory of Clara's studio, the smell of turpentine and sun-warmed canvas, the way she laughed when paint streaked across her cheek flooded him. Without hesitation, he added the art set to the cart. He knew instinctively this was more than a toy. It was a lifeline to a piece of her mother Lily carried within her. Back at the penthouse, the transformation began in subtle increments. Adrian cleared one of the spare rooms, replacing sterile decor with splashes of color Lily chose herself. Posters of lighthouses and rolling hills, echoes of Clara's favorite landscapes, slowly replaced abstract sculptures. A bulletin board appeared, soon crowded with Lily's careful sketches, studies of flowers, city skylines, even a tentative drawing of Adrian himself, though she tucked that one under her pillow rather than display it. Bit by bit, the space softened, and so did he. Yet adaptation was not seamless. Nights were hardest. Lily's grief surfaced in whispers and restless sleep, her small body trembling with dreams of loss. More than once, Adrian woke to muffled sobs from down the hall. At first, he hesitated at her doorway, uncertain if his presence would comfort or intrude, but instinct eventually overrode doubt. He sat beside her, silent, offering the only thing he could, presence. Over time, her sobs quieted faster, her breathing steadied sooner, and the distance between them began to shrink. It was in those quiet hours, long past midnight, that Adrian confronted truths he had long buried. In Clara's absence, Lily had inherited more than her mother's artistry. She bore her resilience, her quiet strength, her unspoken forgiveness. The child asked for nothing yet revealed everything in the way she observed the world, cautious yet hopeful. Adrian found himself studying her as intently as he once studied market trends, learning her rhythms, her subtle cues, the silent language of a child navigating trust. But the outside world refused to grant them privacy. News of Lily's existence leaked within days. Headlines branded her the billionaire's secret daughter, sparking both fascination and scrutiny. Paparazzi camped outside the building. Investors whispered about distractions and vulnerabilities. The board of coal industries, once unwavering in their loyalty, began questioning Adrian's focus. Whispers of instability reached him through veiled remarks and carefully worded memos. For a man who had spent his life cultivating an image of unshakable control, this intrusion felt both invasive and inevitable. Compounding the storm was the emergence of an unexpected threat. Nathan Hayes, Clara's estranged brother. His sudden appearance was not prompted by grief, but by opportunity. Through legal channels, he filed a petition for custody, citing Adrian's lack of parental experience and the relentless demands of his corporate life. Nathan's narrative was compelling to outsiders. A traditional family man offering Lily stability, in contrast to a billionaire whose life was defined by transcontinental meetings and relentless ambition. The timing could not have been worse. Adrian's company was on the brink of finalizing a critical international acquisition deal years in the making, requiring his presence in Seattle for weeks. The board demanded his undivided attention. Investors clamored for reassurances. And yet all Adrian could focus on was the small girl asleep in the next room and the question that haunted him. If forced to choose between empire and child, which would he sacrifice? In the quiet that followed these revelations, Adrian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city sprawled beneath him like a living map of everything he had built. For the first time in his life, the glittering skyline seemed less like triumph and more like a question. The future he had once envisioned with relentless clarity now blurred around the fragile presence of a child who had upended every measure of success he had ever known. By the end of the second week, a fragile rhythm emerged. Morning routines formed, simple breakfasts shared in companionable silence, school drop-offs that grew less tense with each passing day. Evenings were spent amidst art supplies and tentative laughter, the once sterile penthouse softening under Lily's influence. But beneath the tentative peace simmered a storm neither of them could ignore. The custody battle loomed. The Seattle deal demanded decision, and the fragile trust between father and daughter hung suspended in a delicate balance. Adrian Cole had built an empire by predicting outcomes, by mastering control over variables others found chaotic. But now, faced with a child's quiet need and the looming threat of losing her, he confronted a reality no balance sheet could quantify. Love was neither predictable nor negotiable. And for the first time in his meticulously ordered life, he prepared to fight, not for profit, but for something far rarer and infinitely more valuable. Хочешь, чтобы я продолжил сразу с 3 главы по плану? Вы сказали, пиши следующую главу по плану, ChatGPT сказал. Chapter 3, The Threat of Custody and the Choice Between Career and Daughter. The soft rhythm that had begun to take shape in Adrian Cole's penthouse shattered the moment a legal notice arrived on heavy paper, its stark language reducing months of fragile progress to a single challenge. A petition for custody filed by Nathan Hayes. The name struck Adrian with bitter familiarity, the brother Clara had rarely mentioned, the estranged relative who had distanced himself during her illness, yet now emerged with claims of guardianship over Lily. In the sterile phrasing of the court document, Nathan presented himself as a paragon of stability, married, with 3 children, rooted in a quiet suburban life unburdened by corporate chaos. Against him, Adrian feared, the portrait of a billionaire CEO consumed by work and scandal would appear unfit in the eyes of the court. The revelation came as the city buzzed with rumors about Adrian's secret daughter. Media vans lined the streets below the penthouse, photographers stationed at every exit, their lenses hungry for any glimpse of the girl whose existence challenged the carefully crafted image of coal industry's fearless leader. Board members whispered of distractions, investors fretted about instability. The Seattle acquisition, once Adrian's crowning achievement, poised to secure global dominance in construction and infrastructure, now trembled under the weight of public scrutiny and personal upheaval. The timeline for the deal demanded his physical presence in Seattle for 3 weeks, an eternity measured against Lily's tenuous sense of security. Adrian felt the walls of his carefully curated world closing in. In boardrooms, faces that once mirrored admiration now reflected quiet skepticism. Richard Mercer, the most vocal board member, questioned his priorities in thinly veiled terms, demanding assurances that Adrian's focus remained on the deal, not the child. Every meeting became a silent battle to prove he could balance both worlds, a battle he increasingly suspected he was losing. Meanwhile, Lily navigated her new reality with quiet resilience, but the cracks in her composure showed at night. The nightmares that had plagued her since arriving at the penthouse grew more frequent, whispers of her mother's absence manifesting in tear-streaked awakenings. Adrian learned to recognize the sound of her muffled sobs before they reached his door. At first he hesitated, unsure if his presence would soothe or intrude. But slowly, sitting at her bedside in the darkness, he discovered the quiet language of comfort. Presence without expectation, silence that steadied rather than demanded. In those moments, the empire builder, who had once measured life in market share and quarterly profits, began to learn a different calculus. Success, he realized, could no longer be tallied in acquisitions, but in something far more fragile. The tentative trust of a child who had every reason to doubt him. Yet outside the cocoon of their quiet routines, forces gathered to test that fragile trust. Nathan Hayes moved swiftly, leveraging sympathy from the press and painting Adrian as an absentee figure unfit for guardianship. His narrative was compelling. A billionaire too consumed by power to provide the stability a grieving child needed. Nathan's legal team highlighted Adrian's frequent travel, the relentless demands of his company, and the media frenzy surrounding Lily's sudden appearance in his life. They contrasted this with Nathan's own image, a family man with a stable home, familiar traditions, and children who could welcome Lily as a sibling rather than an accessory to scandal. The impending custody hearing hung over Adrian like an unspoken deadline. Each interaction with Lily carried the weight of impermanence, every moment shadowed by the possibility of loss. She seemed to sense the tension, though she rarely spoke of it. Instead, she immersed herself in art, filling sketchbooks with images that betrayed her inner world. Lighthouses standing against storms, solitary figures gazing toward distant horizons, fragile trees growing between towering buildings. Adrian recognized himself in her drawings, sometimes as a towering figure in the background, sometimes as a shadow beside her, but always present in ways he had not been for Clara. As the hearing approached, another decision loomed: the Seattle deal. The board insisted he travel personally to finalize negotiations, arguing that his absence would jeopardize years of work. Adrian weighed the options in sleepless nights, torn between professional obligation and personal transformation. The old Adrian would have chosen the deal without hesitation, rationalizing sacrifice as the price of greatness. But the man who now woke to the sound of Lily's laughter or her nightmares found the choice far less clear. One evening, as the city glittered beyond the penthouse windows, Adrian stood before Lily's bulletin board, a patchwork of her sketches, each pinned with careful precision. At its center hung a new drawing, a family tree reimagined in her own terms. At the top was Clara, her name surrounded by delicate flowers. Below, two branches extended, one bearing Lily's name, the other Adrian's, connected not by tradition or expectation, but by choice. Beneath the tree, in small, careful handwriting, Lily had written, "Families can look however we want them to look." The simplicity of the statement struck Adrian with more force than any corporate negotiation ever had. In that moment, he understood that the custody battle was not about legal rights or bloodlines. It was about proving to Lily and to himself that family was built through presence, through daily choices, through the willingness to stay even when life demanded departure. The next morning, Adrian walked into the boardroom with a clarity that startled even him. He announced his decision to restructure his role in the company, delegating operational oversight to trusted executives while retaining strategic leadership. The Seattle deal would proceed without his physical presence. Video conferences and remote management would suffice. The board erupted in protest, warning of financial risk, but Adrian's resolve held. For the first time in his career, he prioritized something beyond the company's bottom line. Word of his decision spread quickly, drawing mixed reactions. The press speculated about his fall from grace, painting him as distracted, weakened by personal obligations. Yet within the walls of his penthouse, the effect was immediate. Lily, though unaware of the boardroom drama, sensed the shift in him. He was present in ways he hadn't been before, not merely physically but wholly, without the constant tug of divided attention. For her, that presence mattered more than any headline. As the custody hearing approached, Adrian prepared not with the precision of a corporate strategist, but with the quiet determination of a father who had finally discovered what was worth fighting for. The battle ahead would be unlike any he had faced, a confrontation not of profits and losses, but of love and belonging. And though uncertainty loomed like storm clouds on the horizon, one truth had crystallized in him beyond doubt. This fight was not about winning custody. It was about proving to Lily and to himself that he would never walk away again. The courtroom bore none of the grandeur Adrian Cole had grown accustomed to in his world of skyscrapers and corporate triumphs. Here there were no polished speeches rehearsed for investors, no stock tickers to measure success, no applauding shareholders to affirm victory. Instead, the air was heavy with muted whispers, the scratch of pens against paper, and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. The benches were hard, the walls unadorned, and the stakes beyond measure. In this space, the metrics of power and wealth dissolved. What mattered now was something raw, more human, a child's future. Adrian entered with a stillness he rarely possessed. Lily sat across the room with her court-appointed advocate, her small frame almost swallowed by the navy dress she wore for the occasion. Her eyes, wide and searching, scanned the unfamiliar faces until they found him. In that single glance, a flicker of recognition, of fragile trust, Adrian felt the weight of every choice that had brought him here. The empire he had built, the sacrifices he had made, the woman he had lost, all of it converged into this moment where nothing mattered more than keeping her safe. Nathan Hayes presented his case with the confidence of a man convinced of his own virtue. His attorney painted a portrait of stability, a quiet suburban home, a supportive spouse, siblings who could provide Lily with companionship and normalcy. They cited Adrian's relentless travel, the recent media frenzy, the public scrutiny that followed him everywhere. They questioned whether a man consumed by ambition could offer the constancy a grieving child required. The narrative was compelling, bolstered by photographs of Nathan's family smiling in manicured gardens, their life presented as idyllic and unblemished. Adrian's own attorney countered with evidence of transformation. They chronicled the week since Lily had entered his life, the immediate decision to bring her home from the shelter, the restructuring of his role at Cole Industries, the deliberate shift in priorities. They presented testimony from teachers and caregivers who had witnessed the bond forming between father and daughter, subtle yet unmistakable. But it was not legal arguments that would decide this case. Adrian understood that instinctively. It was something quieter, harder to quantify, the authenticity of love, the willingness to stay. When called to testify, Adrian abandoned the carefully crafted statement prepared for him. Years of corporate conditioning had trained him to present strength, to project control, but here honesty felt more powerful than perfection. He spoke plainly, voice steady, yet weighted with emotion. He admitted his failures, the years of absence, the choices that had kept him from Clara and from Lily. He acknowledged that he had missed her first steps, her first words, the milestones no parent should forfeit. But he spoke, too, of what he had discovered since. The quiet courage in her sketches, the resilience in her small hands, the way she hummed when she painted just as Clara once had. He confessed that for the first time in his life, ambition no longer defined him. Lily did. His words hung in the still air of the courtroom, stripped of polish, yet resonating with an honesty no cross-examination could dismantle. Even Nathan, seated stiffly across the aisle, shifted uncomfortably under the weight of unvarnished truth. For all his claims of stability, he could not replicate the bond forming between father and daughter, a bond forged not by blood alone but by choice, by the daily act of showing up. The judge listened in silence, her expression unreadable. She reviewed the evidence, the testimony, the conflicting visions of what constituted a child's best interest. Then, with a gravity that made time itself seem to pause, she rendered her decision. Permanent custody would be granted to Adrian Cole, with provisions for Lily to maintain contact with the Hayes family should she choose. The gavel's strike was sharp, definitive, echoing like the closing of one life and the opening of another. Relief washed over Adrian, not as a triumphant surge, but as a quiet release of breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Across the aisle, Lily's advocate guided her toward him. She approached slowly, almost hesitantly, as though afraid this moment might dissolve if she moved too quickly. When her small hand slipped into his, Adrian felt a weight lift, not just the burden of the court's judgment, but the heavier burden of his own doubts. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe they might actually belong to one another. The days that followed carried a strange, luminous calm. The headlines shifted from speculation to certainty. Cole awarded custody amid public battle. The board at Cole Industries adjusted to a new reality. A chairman who delegated freely, who no longer defined worth by sleepless nights and ruthless schedules. Adrian reshaped his role, not as retreat, but as evolution, redefining success in terms more intimate than profit margins. The penthouse transformed with quiet inevitability. Where once stark minimalism had reigned, now color bloomed in unexpected corners. Lily's drawings adorned the walls, lighthouses, cityscapes, quiet portraits of two figures side by side. The sterile guest room became her sanctuary, shelves lined with books and art supplies, walls painted soft blue by her request. The hum of loneliness that had haunted Adrian's home was replaced by the soft cadence of childhood. Laughter echoing down hallways, whispered goodnights, the rustle of sketchbooks opening and closing. Months later, on a quiet evening, tinged with gold from the setting sun, Adrian stood beside Lily on the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline stretched vast and gleaming, each tower a monument to a life he once believed was everything. Beside him, Lily leaned against the railing, her hair catching the wind, eyes fixed not on the buildings, but on the horizon beyond. She asked softly if he missed his old life, the constant meetings, the ceaseless travel, the unbroken chase for more. Adrian considered the question, then realized the answer had long since changed. He missed nothing. Not because that life had no value, but because its meaning had been eclipsed by something far greater. He had traded the predictable rhythm of acquisitions for the unpredictable joy of fatherhood, the sterile comfort of solitude for the messy, beautiful chaos of family. In the quiet between them, he understood what Clara had always known. Love was not found in grand gestures or perfect timing, but in the choice to stay, day after day, even when it was hardest. As twilight deepened, Lily reached for his hand. In that simple gesture lay everything, the forgiveness he did not deserve, the belonging they both had sought, the promise of a future neither could have imagined months ago. For Adrian Cole, architect of towers and builder of empires, no blueprint had ever been more precious than this. A second chance at family, drawn not in steel and glass, but in the fragile, enduring lines of love. If this story moved you, don't leave just yet. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next. And if you want more heart-stopping stories like this one, check out the videos popping up on your screen right now. Each one will keep you hooked until the very end.